Okay, let me check quickly on Twitter if it works.
Paging Twitter, can you hear us?
Yeah, it's working. So I see it on my Twitter account. I see it on the Starkware account as well. Okay, here we go. So go ahead, Isabel.
All right. Okay. Well, I'm super excited about this chat. This is my first time meeting Alex, which is very exciting. And Matt and I have met very briefly at Bitcoin Park, but haven't really gotten a chance to kind of get your quick takes. So excited about that. And Abdel, of course, from Starkware. So yeah, we have Alex Gladstein, Chief Strategy Officer from the Human Rights Foundation, Matt Odell, representing OpenSats, the OpenSats initiative right now. And yeah, we're kind of, I think, just going to start the conversation by sharing that Starkware recently made pretty significant contributions both to OpenSats and also to the Human Rights Foundation. We'll talk a little bit more, in detail about kind of what both of these organizations are doing, what they're fighting for. We'll kind of dive into sort of the nitty-gritty of some of the kind of issues I think facing Bitcoin as a freedom technology, so to speak. But before we do that, I wanted to just kind of open the floor to Abdel to share a little bit about why Starkware made these contributions to these organizations specifically, and kind of how the kind of open source mission, first of all, of Bitcoin, as well as sort of Bitcoin as a technology for liberty, fits within the broader Starkware picture.
Yeah, sure. So for us at Starkware, like Bitcoin is very important. So right now it's our core priority. We want to expand Starknet to settle on Bitcoin, and also in general contribute as much as we can to hyper Bitcoinization of the world. So this is the mission in general. So which means like two main aspects. One is to make Starknet an extension of Bitcoin as a ZK rollup, a layer 2 on top of Bitcoin, and to enable what is called usually like Bitcoin finance, or being able to do more with your Bitcoin, basically, with, of course, the minimal trust assumptions as possible. Ideally, you want something that is completely trustless, that have the same exact security and censorship resistance properties that Bitcoin layer 1. But of course, right now, as Bitcoin is right now, we cannot achieve the same level of security that we have right now on Ethereum, because we cannot verify natively zero-knowledge proofs on Bitcoin layer 1. So we decided that we will take some steps in between, which is to implement a BitVM bridge, which is the state of the art of what is possible to do right now on Bitcoin without any change, which is like some way to do some optimistic ZK verification on Bitcoin. Anyway, it will be a way for us to have an intermediate step to be able to have a foot on Bitcoin, so to speak, and unleash like more liquidity, some productive capital that you can use on Starknet, and also develop more the application layer that will use those Bitcoin assets. And the idea is to make it like future-proof. Like right now it's not even BitVM, so we are using like regular wrap Bitcoin assets with the worst security assumptions, because you have the counterparty risks and whatnot. But we can still do like a lot of stuff right now with those stuff like staking and like lending, borrowing kind of stuff, and then the BitVM bridge, and then the trustless vision at some point. So this is for Starknet, and at the same time, we want to leverage the technology that we are building, which is zero-knowledge proofs, for Bitcoin in general, beside the scope of Starknet, because there are applications for scaling Bitcoin that can use zero-knowledge proofs, but there are more that stuff you can do, building zero-knowledge ZK-like client, better SPD proofs, and stuff like that. So this is why it's very important for us that Bitcoin, first of all, that Bitcoin will succeed. We believe, and I believe, that Bitcoin in the current state cannot succeed, as in it's good only, it's mostly good as a store of value, but not as P2P cash. And I believe that if it's not a P2P cash, it has failed for the mission, especially if we talk about freedom tech, which is the topic of this discussion. So it's very important for us. So we want to contribute as much as we can for Bitcoin success in general, even beside like the use of zero-knowledge proofs, because no matter what we do, if Bitcoin fails, we fail. I'm not only talking about Starkware, but us like as humans. I think it's a bit failure if Bitcoin fails. Anyway, so that's why it's very important for us to support serious people, serious organizations that are doing a lot of work to support Bitcoin, especially on the open source front. And of course, OpenSats and the Human Rights Foundation were the best organizations possible for that. So that's why.
Awesome. Well, I am excited to get into in a little bit more about how zero knowledge proofs can be used both for scaling as well as privacy. So hopefully we'll touch on both of those subjects in some depth over the course of this panel. Alex, I'm wondering if we could start with you. Just share a little bit about the mission of the Human Rights Foundation, and I think specifically like how the Human Rights Foundation got into Bitcoin. That was something sort of happened in a little bit more of its modern history, and kind of I'd love to hear a little bit about that if you don't mind sharing.
Sure. So the Human Rights Foundation was born out of basically a gap in the human rights industry where almost all the money for human rights comes from rich Western wealthy countries, and predictably they spend it inside those countries, and it makes a lot of sense, right? You're much more empathetic to the people around you and your family and your local communities than you are to like somewhere very far away from you. So what ends up happening is almost all the focus financially in the human rights space goes towards countries that already have a lot of protections. And conversely, if you try to start a human rights group, or if you're a billionaire and you try to fund the opposition in a place like Hong Kong or Saudi Arabia or Russia or China, etc., you get Jimmy lied immediately, and you're put in prison and everything's taken from you. So there's a huge asymmetric structural imbalance in human rights where something like 95+% of all the money is spent inside what most people would call democracies, and for the like 60-70% of the population that lives under authoritarian regimes and dictatorships, there's just not that much money going around. Just to give you some numbers, I'd be shocked if today in 2026, I'd be shocked if the total amount of funding for human rights work in China, the world's largest country, was more than like $6 or $7 million. Just to give you like a sense. Whereas it's a $1 billion industry, right? So we were born out of a sort of reaction to that. Like there wasn't enough focus on authoritarianism. So naturally, we were drawn towards technologies that would thrive under the most intense political conditions. So that started with essentially encrypted messaging. So in the 2012, 2013 era, we started to get very into that and realizing, oh my God, all these people are just using plain text. And that was just normal back then. Because most global human rights activists didn't use PGP. That was something just for like Western cypherpunks. Like most human rights advocates just didn't do it. So over like maybe a span of 5, 6, 7 years, we saw a vast conversion of essentially everybody in human rights from plain text to something like a signal, essentially. So that was, we'll call it 2013 to 2020. So by the time you had the pandemic time, almost everybody was on Signal. But that took time, right? So at the same time, we also started looking at Bitcoin. Julian Assange spoke at the second Oslo Freedom Forum, and we were paying attention to what he was doing very early on. But and we had some donors who wanted to give us some Bitcoin, and we had some early small projects, but it wasn't until the 16-17 cycle that it became more clear that this was actually going to be a thing that could be used at scale, right, for us. And then ever since then, we've just been building out a Bitcoin program, and we're seeing exactly what we saw with Signal. Like 2020 to 2030 is the same deal. By 2030, every single human rights group will use Bitcoin. So we're just sort of on that adventure. I would say a decent minority of them use it today already. Maybe even a plurality, maybe 30-40%. Most of them use it very quietly. There's a lot of misinformation, obviously, in the world about Bitcoin. So a lot of the left-leaning human rights groups don't want to be public about their use of Bitcoin because their Western donor bases would be upset because like people have a allergic reaction to the word Bitcoin, especially on the progressive side, unfortunately. But I think you're just seeing it happen. I mean, it's happening. The Bitcoinization of human rights groups is happening. So we're doing what we can to get that to 100% because people need unstoppable money in the age of, total electronic control over finance. It's a very simple, if a government can freeze your bank account whenever they want to, then they can essentially disable political opposition and cement their control. So we need something else.
Just to like dive into that a little bit more deeply for folks who might be somewhat new to this conversation, could you give a little bit more color or description of like what kind of financial repression people are facing that Bitcoin is potentially a solve for in some of these locations?
Sure. Yeah. Let's just look at the last 5, 6 years. The most widespread one is currency devaluation and hyperinflation. This happens all over the world. Most people are relatively insulated from it. But even in the United States, the dollar has lost about 40% of its value, right, in that span. But now look at countries like Nigeria or Egypt, which are the largest countries in Africa and the Middle East. Those currencies have lost 70, 80, 90% of their value against the dollar, which also lost 40%. So you're talking people whose wages, and it's not like when there's a currency devaluation, people get raises nominally. They don't. Their currency buys less. So you're talking about hundreds of millions of people around the world, especially in corrupt dictatorships, where despite all this crazy human progress and scientific innovation and AI deflation, all this stuff, their wage buys them less bread than it did 6 years ago. This is just the reality for like lots of people.
For 6 months
And
ago.
Yeah, but yeah, exactly. But over like the span of 2, 3, 4, 5 years, it gets really apparent. Now take the inverse, right? So Cuba was a place I was studying 2020, 21 when they started to have hyperinflation. And a lot of Cubans already knew about Bitcoin and they were saving in Bitcoin. And it's like, okay, imagine being up 20 to 40x, okay, versus being down 99.9%. So that's why Bitcoin, is a matter of life and death for a lot of people. So I would say number one is just protection against mass theft by currency devaluation. But the second one is censorship. So if my organization tries to make a bank wire to someone in the country of Georgia or Egypt or something like that, like the way the banking system works is it's built for surveillance, right? So it's like the recipient bank, which of course is in league with the state in any of these authoritarian countries, or really in any country, they immediately will report that there's a wire from this giant capital letters Human Rights Foundation that's come into this organization. And maybe at best they get questioned, and usually, and at worst, the money gets frozen and they get arrested or worse. So that's like normal now. So you can't really use a bank wire to fund activists in most places these days. It's too dangerous or it doesn't work. So Bitcoin is an amazing solution because the government doesn't know that it's happening. Even with just the most basic on-chain transactions, it's possible to do this very safely. So that's huge. So it sort of replaces the bank wire from a donation and from a grant perspective. And then number three would be like, there's obviously more dimensions, but the last one I'll just mention is just general inclusion and connectivity for people. A lot of the software out there, it doesn't work in Iran or whatever. It doesn't work in country X or Y or Z. But anyone can spin up a fundraiser and use Nostr, for example, and make a public-private key identity, and then just start fundraising, like today, right now, with no permission from anybody. They don't have to ask permission or fill out paperwork, and that just wasn't really possible 5, 6, 7 years ago. So the ability to do fundraising and operations in a fully open, permissionless stack is very exciting. So those are some of the reasons why this technology matters for the work we do.
Awesome. I am super excited to dive deeper into a bunch of those topics that we just covered. But before we do, Odell, would you mind sharing a little bit about OpenSats? OpenSats is a pretty different organization. I think much more recently founded within the past couple of years, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'd love to hear kind of, why OpenSats was created and sort of what its core mission is.
Yeah. So I've been active in Bitcoin for about 13 years now. About 7 years ago, January 2019, me and Alex had actually developed a pretty strong friendship, and he invited me out to San Francisco, and it was the first time he wanted to train activists how to use Bitcoin, and he wanted me to be a part of it. There was like 4 of us Bitcoiners. We did it at Cash App headquarters. There was about 10 or so activists. And at that point, I already had developed a pretty strong conviction that Bitcoin was the best money possible, that my family heavily relied on it, and that we needed to make this thing work. But I had a little bit rose-colored glasses. So we did this training session in 2019, and the tools were horrible. It was really bad. It was a very positive experience. I think the activists were very perceptive to it. They obviously already realized the need. We didn't have to explain the need for better money to them. They just wanted to know which tools to use and how to use them, and the tools were very deficient. I mean, I think Lightning was barely in its infancy at that point. I don't think we had even done the Lightning torch on Twitter yet. Maybe we were about to. BTC Pay Server was brand new, if not created. It might not even been created yet. But if you start to think like, what are their needs, right? Their needs are very good mobile wallets, being able to accept donations privately and sovereignly, right? So that's why I highlight BTC Pay Server. We didn't really have that many good cross-platform mobile wallets. The hardware wallet space was really abysmal. So I came away from that twofold, right? My conviction was renewed that we needed to make this work, but also that I was frustrated we weren't moving quick enough, and what we needed to do was accelerate. So I said to myself, I also don't like doing things that someone else is already doing. So I was like, where could I provide value to the movement? Where could I provide upside value to the movement? And what I isolated was Bitcoin has this. It's really ironic, right? Because Bitcoin is the base of a global decentralized distributed financial network, but it has a money problem. It has a capital allocation problem. A16Z just announced a week ago or 2 weeks ago that they raised $15 billion for like freedom and American dynamism, and their like signature investment is the eye scanning orb for WorldCoin, right? And A16Z, like Bitcoiners, we have a long history with the tech bros in Silicon Valley investing in all this horrible shit that's just basically, it's predatory business models. So I was like, okay, we got to fix the capital allocation problem. HRF's doing great work, but they need help on that front. They need allies there. And I basically isolated it to two different issues: for-profit and charity, right? Grants and for-profit. So we launched 1031 like 2020, 2021, OpenSats around the same time. OpenSats 1031 is my for-profit venture, right? So we invest in for-profit businesses that are advancing Bitcoin as freedom money. But OpenSats was a unique take on a charity that's only possible because of Bitcoin. So we built it from the ground up as a Bitcoin first charity. And what that means we run an incredibly lean operation. We take zero cut out of donations. All donations are held in Bitcoin. We accept dollars because people like donating dollars, but we immediately convert it into Bitcoin if they do. Everything's held in multi-sig. We have a 9-person volunteer board that approves grants. Those grants need a 5-person majority. So to corrupt the board's decision-making, you have to corrupt 5 of 9 volunteer board members. All funds are held in multi-sig. All grants are paid out in Bitcoin. We've sent out about $32 million, a little over $32 million in grants now to grant recipients in 40 plus countries, 371 grant recipients, everything in Bitcoin. Once a month, we send out about $1 million in Bitcoin, currently to like 200 grant recipients. And it just literally would just not be possible without Bitcoin. For instance, Alex mentioned wires. Like, I don't think we could, even if we expanded our team is tiny, but if we expanded our team, we're not sending out 200 plus wires to 40 plus countries every month. It also means that we can guarantee someone a year-long salary, but pay them out monthly. So when their progress reports come in on a quarterly basis, if they're not upholding their side of the bargain, we can cut the grant. So it allows us to give more, be more transparent, and be more efficient. And it just would not be possible without Bitcoin.
Can you touch on just really quickly, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but like just sort of TLDR, why you think this capital allocation exists in the first place? Like, why are there like specific problems related to Bitcoin that just like won't seem to be solved by free markets?
I think it's twofold, right? I think first of all, you can make a lot of money scamming retail. I mean, I'm the first one. I love free markets, and I'm the first one to admit that a lot of Silicon Valley has just followed incentives. And you even see this, you still see this to this day when you talk about like what are the political priorities in DC for the crypto lobby, and that's mostly to dump shitcoins on retail. Like that is their main goal because it's incredibly profitable. And we've seen a lot of those investment funds that have gone that route make a lot of money for their investors, I think at the detriment of society. Like it's a negative to society. So with that in mind, there's two aspects here, right? First of all, I think more user-focused business models are the more difficult path, right? So when you're talking about for-profit funding, usually an investor has to be at least partially ideologically aligned with the path you're taking. And I'll use an example on the 1031 side. We are the largest investor in Start9, so the home nodes that you run at home, but they're fully MIT open source. So you can literally take their software and install it on any computer you want, and they won't make a dime. But they think they can be profitable, and they will hopefully be profitable very soon, selling the pre-made boxes and selling premium services on top. Most investors would completely balk at that, right? We did the opposite. When we invested, we actually encouraged them to switch to MIT. Me and Matt Hill, I love Matt, he's the founder of Start9. Actually, before we invested, would get into public arguments about his license choice. So we came at it from the exact opposite angle. But then on the charity side, you need the charity side because there's a ton of freedom-oriented projects that will never be able to have a business model on them, whether because of incentives or because of regulatory concerns, right? We've seen multiple projects that are focused on privacy and freedom. The actual taking of the fee, trying to add a profit component to it is what makes them vulnerable. So for those two types of projects, whether they're just completely trust minimized or trustless so that a profit can't even be taken, and the incentives aren't aligned with a profit being taken, or because of regulatory reasons, those projects need grant funding. Need is maybe a hard word. Maybe they'd still survive without it. But I think it would take a lot longer. And life is short. Like I don't want to wait 30 years, 50 years. Low time preference is great. But we need the tools today. And the way you accelerate that is by enabling people around the world who want to work on freedom-oriented software to do it full time, rather than do it as a side hobby project while they're trying to pay their rent and feed their kids and whatnot.
I'm glad that you mentioned privacy specifically as sort of a regulatory issue in a lot of instances. I want to come back to that at some point. But before we kind of go into like the real deep weeds, I was wondering if each of you could kind of share like a couple of examples that come to mind of projects that are receiving grant funding or, you think may not necessarily be as successful as they are without the sort of nonprofit edition that are impactful or that have been impactful in 2025. Like, what are these open source projects that you're really like watching that are, making waves, and how are they helping?
So I would say there's a handful of ways to approach that. We have a program where we support individuals, which I think is relatively unique in the space, certainly in the human rights space. In human rights, you're supposed to support groups. And it's weird because oftentimes human rights groups will raise a bunch of money, but then you find out that the leader of the group doesn't have a salary and is paying for everything themselves. So supporting world-changing individuals directly is really interesting and has a massive impact, I think, in all kinds of ways that's extremely measurable. Gatherings and meetups. So I think that in the digital age, as we get more and more digitized, and more of our relationships are virtual, and we've found it easier in many ways to live in new places that are distant from where we grew up globally, just because of the digital economy and the ease of moving around versus 20 years ago. Physical gatherings that routinely or intermittently bring communities together are really important. You just get a completely different kind of conversation going in person than on a Zoom or whatever, especially when you can prolong it over a day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, whatever it is. So we aggressively support gatherings. So those could be conferences, those could be retreats, those could be hackathons, those could be summits, and the ripple effects from these are massive. So those would be just sort of the human side. We also attack education a lot. You know, I don't think that Bitcoin has a scaling problem today technologically. I think it will in the future. It certainly doesn't today. Bitcoin could easily have another 10 million users today, like on chain, no problem. The barrier is clearly not technology; it's education. It's just like those 10 million people don't know about Bitcoin and they're not using it. Again, like we could super easily add another 10 to 20 million, you know, occasional on-chain users, and the network would just cruise ahead. So how do we get those 10 to 20 million occasional actual self-custodial users? Education, like you just have to. So that's another piece. And then, yeah, I mean, look, sometimes there are really important protocols that just aren't going to be a business model. A lot of them will actually be a business model, and you know, Matt's exploring that effectively. But some of them are just either in an incubation phase where they're not going to be appealing for an angel investor or VC or whatever, or they're just not really going to ever be profitable. So those are the range of things that we're looking at.
I would, I think that was really well said by Alex. I mean, just to add on to the people component, right? Isabel mentioned earlier that we had met at Bitcoin Park. Me and Abdel met at one of Alex's HRF events, right? And I think these in-person meetings are more important than ever. Those connections are key to the movement. I mean, it's easy to think of Bitcoin as a tech project. You know, it is a software project at the end of the day, but ultimately it's a movement of individuals, right? It's a movement of people that are moving this thing forward, and meeting in person really, really just improves the discourse and accelerates everything. In terms of actual privacy-focused software that I'm pretty excited about on Bitcoin, that we've been very involved with, I think are big successes on the OpenSat side. One is PayJoin DevKit. PayJoin DevKit is a perfect example of something that can never be for-profit funded. It's an open protocol that we need as many people to adopt as possible. Now, what's interesting about PayJoin DevKit is it does mean that large transactors could save a lot of money using PayJoin DevKit. And that's where it's interesting being in both sides of both worlds, because, for example, 1031 were the largest investor in Strike. If Strike enabled PayJoin, it'd be great for their customers in terms of, and themselves, for saving a bunch of money, but it would also add to the overall anonymity set that PayJoin provides significantly. If you start to see, you know, big transactors accept it. Another big win is Cashew. I think I might have met Callie also at one of Alex's in-person events, which just goes to another example of why the in-person events are so important. But Cashew is really interesting because it kind of came around. First of all, Alex with HRF had a bounty program that he did in partnership with Strike that OpenSats judged, and Callie won that bounty, right? So all the world's connecting there. But then Callie was at an HRF event with all of us, and he's like, what should I do? Do I make this a for-profit venture? Do I do this? Do I do that? And it was around the same time as Tornado Cash and Samurai and everything was unfolding. And we said, you should go the nonprofit route. You have plenty of support. You have us, you have HRF. We can make this, you know, an actual, you know, well-funded open source initiative. And I think it's been a massive success. People today use Cashew all the time. It offers very strong privacy guarantees. And what's really cool about it, it's the first time, both with PayJoin and Cashew, it's the first time that the private option is actually the cheaper option, which I think is key. Because people just follow their incentives, right? So if they can save money and it happens to also offer them better privacy, it's just a massive benefit.
Yeah. And even UX is superior in the case of Cashew. Even UX is superior. It's faster.
Yeah, you need the UX. You need to reduce the friction. The private option needs to be the lowest friction option, and that's cost and also, you know, user experience. And then, you know, last but not least, like we're still actively funding CoinJoin projects. We haven't announced it yet, but I think we're about to announce. So you heard it here first. We're about to announce a grant for Join Market NG, which is a complete rewrite of Join Market, which is an open protocol for CoinJoins that's been around for a long time that I'm pretty excited about. But, you know, there's a lot of movement happening behind the scenes that people just aren't paying attention to, and I'm quite optimistic on that front.
Speaking of cash, oh, Abdel, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to also second on the human component that is very important. For example, you mentioned an event when we met together, Alex and Odell, and during this event, we kept in touch with some people, and then we sent just recently, like 2 days ago, some people from our team in the AI Hack for Freedom, organized by you guys and HRF and Bitcoin Park. And so it's amazing to keep in touch with those people, to see the progress and collaborate on various projects. So I wanted to second the human component that is key. But because at the end of the day, ultimately, yes, we have proof of work, we have consensus, we have cryptography and whatnot. But ultimately, the strength of Bitcoin comes from the social layer, the people that will protect its core principles, that will make sure that it won't be captured, education as well, etc. And this comes from the social layer, not only with the math and cryptography. So it's very important.
Well, speaking of Cashew, I think this is a great opportunity to do like a little bit of a deeper dive into, I think, some of the issues that Bitcoin faces as a freedom technology, so to speak. Cashew is a really good example of something that offers an enormous amount of privacy. However, there's this big trade-off, which is that it's custodial, pretty much fully custodial. How do you guys sort of view, and this is something common that we see, in various protocols, whether that be Lightning, Fedi, right? Like there's some sort of custody and privacy trade-off often with these tech. What's sort of your take on that trade-off and sort of how that affects people and how, those trade-offs will be navigated? What's sort of your point of view on sort of what we're often seeing was this trade-off between custody and privacy?
You want to take it, Alex or Abdel?
Yeah, sure.
Go for it.
I mean, look,
Go ahead, Alex.
People are on a journey with Bitcoin. I think that you have self-custodial Bitcoin as a journey, and then you have, on the other hand, like practical daily needs. So there's one wallet that actually HRF's been supporting for almost 6 years, not continuously, but on and off where we can. I think this wallet, Zeus, was our second ever gift that we made from the fund. They later went on to win a couple of the bounties that we had in our bounty program. And there's been some other support along the way. And what's really interesting about Zeus is that Evan, one of the founder, has really made it a point to immerse himself in some of the events we've done, and has really tried to learn what do people really need, and especially human rights activists. I think he understands that if his tool can be good for people who are under extreme political threat, then it can be good for anybody, right? So if you look at what he's doing, it's really interesting because he's basically building a tool that's moving towards essentially there's steps towards freedom, right? So when you start Zeus, kind of moving forward, you have a certain amount of trade-offs you're making. And then as you learn more and you become more experienced and you add more capital to your wallet, you are sort of encouraged to take more steps to secure that fully. And I think that this is a really nice way to approach things, because the average person, when they first start using Bitcoin, is just going to be confused by a lot of the more extreme things that we do to really secure our freedom on the internet, just in terms of even just things like seed phrases and such like that. So he's got some really clever ways to do that. And then, as you have, whether it be fully custodial eCash, or maybe we'll see things like Arc and Spark, I'm not sure. But you start to get ways to kind of offer immediate use with no paperwork and worries. And then as you grow your capital, you take matters into your own hands. And I'm actually two things I would just say about that. One, I just think that eCash, I think eCash gets to a point where obviously you can get rugged, but there are things happening with eCash where you don't have to really rely on one person. You can have payments that come from many sources. You can have ways to verify what the mint is doing. I think eCash gets really close to whatever the final outcome of something like an Arc or a Spark is, in terms of trade-offs, unilateral exit being the main thing I care about, right? Can you unilaterally exit? And my prediction is that within 5 years, eCash is really close to those quote unquote layers, right? Where maybe it can serve the needs of people. And again, that would be super exciting, because it means we don't necessarily have to add over complexity to Bitcoin. The second thing I would say is you can do that. I just saw this incredible presentation from Jeremy Rubin I mean, I think people are going to be able to do basically whatever they want with Bitcoin with no soft fork moving forward with some of the stuff that he and Robin Linus are working on. So, you do what you want, and then no one else has to comply or even understand what you're doing. And I think that that's really, really crazy. And we just haven't even begun to understand what the possibilities are for that. So I would say on the one hand, I wouldn't rule out eCash as getting like more and more closer to unilateral exit as it evolves. And number two, I think we can get to some of this stuff where you're essentially able to run a full Turing complete whatever you want on Bitcoin with no soft fork. And I didn't really realize that was possible, and it probably wasn't until this year. So we're gonna get to that with some of the stuff that Jeremy Rubin and Robin Linus are doing. So we'll see. I mean, it's a brave new world out there. So that's all I'll say.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add two quick pieces to Alex's point. I mean, first of all, I think the graduated wallet concept is great.
That's the word, graduated wallet. Yeah.
Yeah. I was waiting for you to say it, but that's why I'm here.
Thank you.
But look, I think it's overblown, right? Look, I think the custodial risk, right? Like obviously there's custodial risk if you use Cashew, but a ton of people are using Bitcoin in a custodial way right now. They're just getting no privacy, and they're getting the exact opposite. They're getting even worse privacy guarantees because they're fully KYC'd and they're doing ID checks and whatnot.
Well, they can't move it because it's in an ETF or whatever.
Yeah.
And they can't move it whenever
if they're
they
buying
want.
MSTR or an ETF or what if it's not even just Bitcoin, right? If they're using Venmo or Revolut or whatever, they're using custodial systems that offer strictly worse trade offsets than Cashew does. And Cashew's been very, I think, transparent about those risks, which is key. It's one thing if they were going out there and Callie and other Cashew promoters were saying this thing is trustless and you can't get rugged, blah blah blah. This is the future. No, they're very honest about the trade-off balance, and I think that's fine. I think first of all, I think what we're seeing is a lot of people are using this as a spending wallet, right? So they're using it for $200,000, something like that. You can think about it like the cash you have in your back pocket. You have cash in your back pocket. You go out onto Main Street at night or whatever, you get mugged. Your world's not over. Right. But at the end of the day, you want to go and be able to spend things easily and have good privacy when you do that. I think Cashew fits really well there. The bigger concern to me is, we joke around about is like who will run the mints, right? Like who will build the roads? Because that's where the regulatory concern is, right? Is on who's actually running these things. And you really want as many as possible to be running. And I think that is solved by just making it easier to run mints privately at home, self-hosting. And so one project that we're funding out of OpenSats is called Orchard, which basically tries to remove the technical complexities of running a Cashew mint. It gives you a nice little GUI. You can run it on your Start9 or whatever server you're running at home, and you can see everything that's happening in your mint, right? This dream of small community mints around the world that are helping out their neighbors, helping out their family, and running on a much smaller scale. Cashew in itself, the reason it's so exciting is because it's so simple, right? It doesn't require a soft fork. You just have to run a Lightning node. It doesn't I'm also very excited about Fedimint, but doesn't require multi-sig, doesn't require federation. You don't have to have as much coordination. They can move very quick and break things, which you can't do with the protocol layer of Bitcoin. So that's why it's exciting. And it comes with the trade-off that you're trusting the mint operator. And I think that's a completely reasonable trade-off for users to make. And we see users around the world that are using it today under that trade-off model. And it's a very useful tool for them.
Abdul, any other thoughts?
Yeah, I overall I agree with all that was said. I would say, first of all, there is no silver bullet, and it's all about having optionality for users depending on their risk profiles and what they want. So this is good that we have all this design space with different solutions, with different trade-offs and so on. And also one phenomenon that we see is that the wallets are smarter now, and they can choose the best scaling solution in a smart way that is not super complex for the user. For example, Bull Bitcoin, they have an elegant way to present this to the wallet, to the user. As you said, like spending wallet, saving wallets, this kind of stuff that people can grasp, and they can understand that some technology is more for pocket money and some is more for long-term saving. And there is a way also to improve on the UX level to have wallets that will be more sophisticated but still provide a good UX. So it's good to have all those solutions. And also I would think that, yeah, it's all about having incremental improvements and ways to get closer and closer to full self-custody and sovereignty and whatnot. And I think Cashew fits well in this category of projects that are better than the status quo of people that are not using Bitcoin at all or using Bitcoin through ETFs and whatnot. It's a good way also to bridge and understand better what Bitcoin is and what it can provide and whatnot. So I think it's good. And I think it's good that we explore at the same time all those scaling solutions. Some of them general purpose, some of them require soft fork, some of them will also be good ways to bring privacy and also quantum resistance. I probably think you guys are not more in the camp that think the quantum threat is not real. I do care about it, but regardless, I think it's good that we explore all those solutions at the same time. Yeah.
On the regulatory front, I mean,
I was just going to say one thing on that. It doesn't really matter how technologically advanced you make Bitcoin if the merchants aren't willing to accept it. You've hit a stumbling block. So one of the other things Zeus does is they struck up a collaboration with Money Badger, which is a pretty amazing company in South Africa. So essentially, you're going to be able to use Zeus and pay for whatever you want at nearly 50% of all the retailers in South Africa, for example. So this is the way we can hack into the existing system, and you can have all these sovereign people living on the Bitcoin standard, and they can just buy anything. And I think that's one of the things we're most excited about. We're trying to aggressively fund other versions of that. There's another one in Thailand where it's a little more, it's not quite as smooth, but basically another country where everything is QR code, right? So what you do is I did this when I was there a few months ago, when I was, grabbing drinks, you scan the QR code and someone else pays the fiat invoice and you pay that person in Lightning. So the establishment has no idea that Bitcoin was involved. They were paid by whatever, fiat, and you have amazing privacy. So you can go into Thailand and basically live there today and just be like completely Lightning sovereign. It's pretty amazing. So those are the really key things. On the quantum thing, I think most people would agree it's important to consider. It's just not today. But we've already done a bunch of research on this. We had a whole research paper we put out last year on this, and we know what the risks are. But look, I think especially the stuff that, like, for example, Jeremy and Robin are working on. It'll allow people to migrate at their own pace, and the people, like, whenever it does become a threat, people will be able to move their coins. And if you don't want to move your coins, maybe you're fucked. But like, as long as people have sovereignty and choice, we're still living in the Bitcoin world. If someone else is making a decision for you, that's the altcoin world, right? We don't want to be over there. We want to be where, like, you get to decide, right? So I think it's heading in the right direction. With that, I have to hop, guys, but this was super fun. Thank you very much. Super grateful for the support, and
thank you very much.
Let's do it again sometime.
Yeah, sure. Bye. Yeah.
I have more time if you want to continue.
Yeah, let's do it.
We can continue 5-10 minutes, something like that.
I'm curious. I mean, like, you kind of like alluded to this a couple times, even when you were sort of talking about the risk to, folks who are spinning up mints, eCash mints. I think there's sort of broader question of like, what is the impact of, regulatory crackdowns on privacy protocols, especially builders of privacy protocols? And I would love to hear your thoughts on that, Odell, as well as Abdel. I would love to hear your thoughts also. Yeah.
I mean, look, I wear many hats, right? So this hat, my 1031 hat, actually makes me money. OpenSats, I don't make any money on. It's volunteer. Bitcoin Park, which we've talked about earlier, is technically a unprofitable for-profit venture, so we lose money on that one. And then Bitcoin Policy Institute is my regulatory front, which I also don't make any money off of. I'm simply on the board of Bitcoin Policy Institute. But the goal with Bitcoin Policy Institute is to try and make a better regulatory regime, specifically in the United States, right? And so when I was a young Bitcoiner, I strongly believed, and I still strongly believe, that, you know, almost universally the state is just an arm of evil. Like we don't need the state. I want to reduce the state as much as possible. And I think the real actionable way to solve that is by empowering individuals with tools that circumvent means of control that are used against us as a society. But also, I'm a student of history, and I've had a lot of conversations with Adam Back specifically about the early cypherpunk movement and the early crypto wars. And they basically did a two-front approach, right? They kept shipping the tools, they kept shipping the code, but at the same time, they had legal fights, and they fought governments around the world on a legal basis to protect people's digital freedoms and our right to free speech. And so I think we need both. And specifically, my focus has been America, because this is where I build my businesses and this is where I raise my family. So I have a very strong incentive to try and make this, you know, the best place in the world for people to build open source software and other freedom tech. And on that front, I will say, look, I think over the last decade or so, we've been trending in a horrible direction, just net negative. I think over the last 2 years is probably the first time that trend has broken to a degree. I think, you know, people, it's easy to get caught up in stuff and get more excited about what gains we might see. And probably a lot of people are disappointed about, you know, maybe the first year of the Trump administration in terms of how that's affected open source developers and Bitcoiners. I mean, specifically, the Samurai developers got jailed under Trump. That prosecution started under Biden, though, but nonetheless, they're in jail today. So I think it's important to level our expectations, right, on who we're working with here. But the progress has been pretty significant, I think. Now what we need to do is we need actual, like, legal law, in-law wins, like legislation and actual wins that guarantee, nothing guarantees anything with the government, but protects us to a degree that makes it more difficult to retroactively unwind, right? And I think step number one is I always say, keep us out of the gulags, right? Like, step number one is, and in America at least, like, we shouldn't have, you know, 40 FBI agents or whatever come to your house in the middle of the night with a no-knock warrant raid while your family's sleeping and throw you in jail. Like that, I mean, that's a pretty simple ask. Like, you shouldn't have to live that way. And that's how we were living 2 years ago. And I think we're probably not living that way right now. I'm not going to say it definitively, but that's the goal. And I will say that for the first time, really, with Bitcoin Policy Institute, we actually have people that are there 24/7, 365 in DC, and their main focus is protecting open source developers, protecting self-custody Bitcoin usage, and protecting private Bitcoin usage. So, I mean, I think, yeah, I think we've seen wins. Hopefully we see more wins. We're trending in a better direction. We've made great progress over the last 2 years. To the Mint's question specifically, I think the people running these services will always be, that's the hardest win. I think an actionable, accessible win is protecting developers who write open source software that are not custodying funds. I think that should be something that everyone should be able to agree to, and that is something that is protected under the U.S. Constitution in terms of free speech.
Abdel, you want to add anything about, I mean, again, I know, like, Starkware is obviously kind of pushing the envelope in many ways in terms of, like, what they can make happen on the privacy front from a technical perspective, but you're also this, you know, enormous company with a huge regulatory watch on you. You know, how has that affected what you're building?
Absolutely, yeah. There is the theory and then the reality of some people running the company that don't want to go to jail and whatnot. So I will tell you, like, honestly, how I see it. So we do have some constraints, and we cannot do whatever we want for sure. And right now we are literally prioritizing privacy features on Starknet. So it's very hot topic that we are dealing with right now. So we unfortunately have no choice to build compliant privacy on the protocol level. We don't have the choice. It's a given. I mean, the other option would be like to go to jail, but I think no one wants to take it. So we'll have compliant privacy on the protocol level. However, there are two important things that make me comfortable with this reality. One is we will do privacy that is compliant, but everything we do is open source, and Starknet is permissionless. I don't know how much I can say openly, but probably people understand what it means. So Starknet is permissionless, and what we do in terms of the privacy features, they are open source. So you can take your own conclusion on that. And then the second aspect is this constraint is actually good in terms of incentives, because it gives us a lot of incentives to actually push for more decentralization of Starknet. Because once Starknet is fully decentralized completely and no single entity operates it and whatnot, and it's completely permissionless, no one can stop it, then you can just say, I cannot do anything. I cannot stop, and I cannot stop even if North Korean hackers are using your privacy services. If you simply can't do anything, that's the best scenario. So can't be evil. So this is the target. So it's good. It's a good incentive for us to have this constraint. So I'm actually happy that we have it. Because otherwise, if we for example, if we did not decide recently to actually accelerate on privacy, we would have less incentives to actually decentralize and to make Starknet completely unneeded for Starknet. So it's good in a way. And then at the same time, I would say that there is a lot. Yeah, I agree. We need also to push on the legal fight, and some people in our company do that. So Catherine, so he's from America, so she's the general counsel of Starkware, and she is participating actively on those discussions with the SEC and regulators and whatnot. As much as I hate them, I think we don't have the choice, and we need to deal with this reality. So we have people that are doing this legal fight. I'm more on the technical fight and more on the cypherpunk advocacy fight, but we need both because this is the reality. We cannot live without it. The only caveat I would add that where I slightly differ with you, Odell, but it makes a lot of sense, is about the American-centric view of Bitcoin, simply because the risk of capture and surveillance and so on, it comes from entities that have the power to impact it, and I cannot think about a bigger threat than the biggest superpower of the world. So yes, for sure, it's good if the US is Bitcoin friendly and whatnot, but also it's the most powerful power that could become a threat to Bitcoin. And also there are a lot of business corporations and so on that are more in the camp that is a bit dangerous to me, which is the camp of the store of value only, or number go up only, and not really P2P cash. So all those Bitcoin treasury companies, Michael Saylor and whatnot. And I'm saying that, and we want them on Starknet, to be honest. Like, this is one of the main targets we want, to attract liquidity or to generate productive capital, lending, borrowing on Starknet and so on. But my honest opinion is that I also see them as a risk, because they have a lot of incentives of not changing anything on Bitcoin, and they are fine if it's just a store of value. But if it's store of value, as Alex was saying at the beginning, it covers only one dimension, which is about protecting against deflation, about currency debasement and so on, but not really about the censorship resistance aspect, and for those human rights activists to have always a way to be able to transact anywhere on the planet, anytime and so on, without surveillance. So I'm just a bit worried about the full American-centric view of that aspect, but yeah.
Odell, I want to make sure, while we still have a couple of minutes, I want to kind of ask you just broadly, aside from sort of like what I would call like maybe like UX types of frictions, or like ways that Bitcoin maybe still has like work to do in terms of like how people interact with it on a regular basis, do you have any, what do you think are like concerns that we should be thinking of in terms of just the general like health of the network? I know that, quantum was brought up. Are there any, like, what do you think of as like the biggest threats to the network, or like the security of the network, that we need to be, thinking about and coming up with solutions for?
I think Bitcoin as a protocol and as a network is quite healthy. I think it's healthier than it's ever been. I think it's easy to get stuck in, I don't know, like people used to complain about the 24-hour news cycle. Like we're at like the 1-hour news cycle now. It is like completely compressed. People wake up in the morning, they open X, they're like, what are we supposed to be angry about today? What am I supposed to be concerned about today? And it's important to zoom out and think about specifically a project like Bitcoin, which if successful is a generational project, and you have to start thinking on 5-year, 10-year timescales. And we're in a great position. Could we be in a better position? Sure. Has it beat all expectations from what I was expecting 10 years ago? Yes, by leaps and bounds. So what are the loudest complaints? Well, I think quantum we've heard recently. I think there's a lot of good research happening there. I think we have to be very deliberate about how we proceed. I think we shouldn't be freezing people's funds or telling people how they should be using Bitcoin. And I think we'll have options, to Alex's point, with basically, like, you can think of it high level, like there'll be quantum resistant address types and you can choose if you want to move to them or not, and people will move to them. But it's very hard to change Bitcoin. That is a value prop. That is a good thing, not a bad thing, because if you can change Bitcoin easily, you can change it for the worse. A malicious attacker can change it for the worse. And so if whatever we choose, whichever path we choose in terms of what does that quantum resistance look like, I think needs to, hold up over the next 50 years, 100 years or whatever. So we have to make the right decision there. What else do we hear? We hear medium exchange restore value. Look, I love Bitcoin. I love spending Bitcoin. I think if people hear my public statements and where my work is focused, they would put me in the medium exchange camp. But this has been a quote unquote war between different aspects of Bitcoin social layer, Bitcoin users for years, right? And it's actually what most people, I think what a lot of people don't realize is you really need both, right? Like your store value is not actually value if you can't spend it without permission, period. Right? Like let's say you hold Bitcoin for 10 years, you have $5 million and you can't spend it. Like you don't actually have any money. And then, so that's the medium exchange piece. Mining centralization used to be way worse than it is today. Like it's actually improved significantly. Is it great? No, it's not ideal, but we're moving in the right direction. And so I think the biggest risk to Bitcoin is probably apathy on the user level and the people level. And so when I talk about that, what am I talking about? Look, can you use Bitcoin as freedom money today? Yes. Can I use Bitcoin as freedom money today? Yes. Can a lot of people I know use Bitcoin as freedom money today? Yes. Can the overwhelming majority of people use Bitcoin as freedom money? Probably with a little bit of education. I think the tools still have a decent amount of friction, and personal responsibility is always more difficult. But if I think about where Bitcoin is in 50 years, 100 years, what percentage of the population is using Bitcoin as freedom money? Probably on our current trajectory, 5%, maybe less. Is that success? Maybe for the 5% that are using it. Is that enough? Maybe yes, because when people realize the need, they'll join that 5%, and maybe most people just won't realize the need. But my focus is how do we increase that baseline number? Because the baseline number is not 85%. Like you're just completely delusional if you think the baseline number of where we're trending is 85%. And then you're just going to be set up for failure. You're going to be in 5 years, 10 years, when we're nowhere near close to it, those expectations are going to grind you down, and you're just going to get burnt out because of it.
Odell, I have so many more follow-up questions for you. I feel like I could go all day. But maybe we'll have to do a part 2 at some point because we just hit the time. Abdel, thank you so much for organizing this. This was so fun. Such a treat for me personally to meet both Alex and Odell. So thank you for the introduction. And any final words from either of you that you want to share?
Yeah, maybe, by the way, before we end, Isabel, you can say something like just a subtle thing about why you are animating this space and whatnot, if you want.
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, I'm happy to. I mean, I am very excited to be kind of joining the Starkware team, so to speak. And kind of, contributing specifically on Starkware's transition into Bitcoin projects. I think Starkware's sort of roots and Eli Ben-Sassan's roots is, in Bitcoin, and sort of always has been in Bitcoin. And then for whatever reason, there's sort of understanding that zero knowledge proofs just like we're not going to be functional in Bitcoin, and this sort of movement into Ethereum happened. And I'm just so thrilled now to be kind of joining the team as we sort of reposition into the Bitcoin space with especially the development of BitVM, which is something I've been very, very close to. I know Robin Linus has come up several times in this interview, and he's had a very big week. He announced his company yesterday with Liam Egan, the development that they're making there. So this is just like a very, very exciting moment. And I think Starkware is likely to be a leader, if not the leader in that movement. So
so we are excited to have you join us, and also for the quantum work, because you are actively involved in that. So my final words will be that so I'm very happy about this panel that we did. It was super exciting, and I'm happy that we have like more than 1,400 people listening to that. I want more people to listen about Freedom Tech, why it's important, and so on. It's a topic that is undercovered, especially in the more like crypto space, unfortunately. I want also more bridges between those two worlds, because there are some actual tech that can be useful for the freedom tech movement. And in terms of the threats, there are many possible threats for Bitcoin. But if I had to pick one, I would say privacy, because it's not only about privacy for the people, but also because privacy is one obvious attack vector. So it's hand in hand with censorship resistance, actually, because you have more ways to put pressure on the people that are using the network, also building the network, and so on. So the more privacy you have, the more protection also you have for individuals using the network, transacting, and so on. So it's not only about not wanting to expose your life or hiding anything, but it's also a protection, and it's better to avoid some capture risk and whatnot. So I would pick privacy.
You need your own private military. It's like one of the two, basically.
Exactly. So
what I like to say, no privacy, no freedom. Like, it's a prerequisite, and then if you have no freedom, you have no wealth. So if you have no privacy, it's impossible to be wealthy.
Absolutely, they're all interconnected.
And I would agree with you. I mean, I think it's not a Bitcoin protocol risk, right? Like, the most vulnerable part about Bitcoin is actually you attack the individuals that use it. And a key attack vector there is the privacy side. And key successes that have been made in attacking Bitcoin is specifically the KYC AML regime. And it's actually not Bitcoin specific. We've seen it in all aspects of our life. I mean, they're KYCing people to use social media now. So it'll probably get worse before it gets better. But I would agree with you that privacy aspect is key. I mean, and it's not a coincidence that that's where you see most of the regulatory attacks focused, is on the privacy side as a result. But I mean, first of all, my camera fell while I was speaking last time, and I just shout out me for just continuing speaking instead of freaking out about that. But it fell off.
So I didn't want to call it out.
It fell off the screen. But now I got it fixed. Part 2, I'm always happy to come back. Let me know. I had fun with this.
Amazing.
I wanted to just quickly, OpenSats, to the apathy part, right? It's like OpenSats is a 501c3 charity. We're a tax deductible organization if you donate in the United States or in select countries that have partnerships or whatever on the 501c3 side. And I'm a volunteer, and most of the people working on the project are volunteers. We have a few full-time employees that are paid out of our operations fund, which is a separate entity. So if you donate, you get 100% pass-through. And so what I've been doing for the last few years is just flying around the world and meeting people, asking them, particularly people that are running companies in the Bitcoin space, and individuals, asking them if they will donate to support OpenSats. And it's been a ridiculous grind. It's been a very difficult grind. And I think part of that, is this idea of apathy, right? It's like, okay, I'm set, so we're good. We don't need to push forward. We don't need to accelerate. And I just wanted a huge shout out to Starkware, because I met Abdel. I didn't even really have to make the ask. They were like, we want to support you. There's obviously no strings attached. you know, here's $400,000, and like that is so huge for us. It's huge for the movement. I wish my raising more funds was that easy. So just thank you for that. You guys are the exception to the rule on that front.
Thank
I
you.
couldn't agree more. Yeah, it's incredible ethos of this company. So thank you.
Amazing. So let's keep in touch and plan part 2 for next time. Yeah, it will be amazing. Thank you, Odell. Bye. Thank you,
Okay.
Isabel.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.